Sons of Apollo with Psychotic Symphony. Yeah, it's another Mike Portnoy project. He teams up with a singer that has worked with Yngwie and a million people in between, not to mention also Derek Sheridian, a former Dream Theater bandmate, and a couple of other fellows that he's very familiar with in order to captivate with this project. Now, this is a disc that's supposed to have mostly progressive metal or progressive rock feel to it, and what actually happens is that that's not all completely true. We get a little bit more bang for our buck whenever it comes to this release. It's a 9-track release that is bookmarked very nicely by 2 epic tracks, the 2 only songs that exceed the 10-minute mark on this album, which means that we start off with one, and that is God of the Sun. And quite frankly, this is honestly the highlight of this release. And that's not saying or taking anything away from the other 8 songs on the album, but immediately you are met with a classic track, one that has a lot of feel, a lot of great moments to it. The keys in the back that you hear from Derek are just pounding, the percussion is very nice, and the vocals are very well handled and maintained. And I love just how they built this chorus for this song, and I dig how it feels like a big track, it's not only just the opener for this album, but if Sons of Apollo were to happen to go live, it would be the first track that they would open with live as well, in order to really pump the crowd up. That's what this chorus really does. It gives you that very energetic feel, and you can just already see the crowds really responding to it very positively. And then we get into tracks such as Coming Home, Signs of the Time, the next 2 tracks on this disc, one that's 4.5 minutes, the other that's about 6.5. And you can already tell some of the variety that's going to be exhibited on here. There's going to be that prog feel, but it's also going to have a little bit of a classic rock jive. There's going to be a little bit of that feeling that you would get from a band such as the Winery Dogs on here from time to time, because after all, there's a couple members of that band included here, and their writing still does have a little bit of a similar feel to it. But with some of these new members, what happens is that it adds an additional part to the story. It's almost like what would happen if you saw or heard a band in a bizarro universe. And Coming Home kind of gives me that feel a little bit, and then you also get that later on with tracks such as Lost in Oblivion, either that or even Divine Addiction. However, you get to track 4, you get to Labyrinth, and once again you are slapped in the face with another epic, a 9-minute plus epic. And this one is another well-constructed song that has a lot of balance to it. And I like how that balance shifts very heavily in the direction of just plain old good songwriting, as opposed to trying to border on the ridiculous and stick with heroics being showcased by each member of this group. It's instead one that uses tact as opposed to over excess, and that does work very much in its corner. It writes very much, or sounds very much like it was written like God of the Sun, and has sort of that tact behind it in order to drive the point home, while also not feeling like you're being sort of inundated with musicality. Instead, it feels very comfortable, but it still takes you on an emotional journey, which is pretty darn awesome. I do like this track. I would probably chronicle it as my 3rd favorite on the album. You're going to notice that my favorite tracks on this are tracks that are either near 10 minutes or over 10 minutes. My 3 favorite tracks are easily God of the Sun, Labyrinth, and the next and final track that we're going to talk about, which is Opus Maximus, which closes this album. I told you that 2 songs over 10 minutes served as the bookends of this disc. This one's 10 minutes and 39 seconds, and it really does reinforce a lot of the themes that you got on this album, but certainly it builds and writes a lot more like Labyrinth and God of the Sun, as you might imagine, considering its considerable length. Again, this is where I really feel that this band has found something. They have found a stride, or a part of themselves as writers, that really just works and gels and feels it doesn't necessarily feel unique for the genre. It feels very run-of-the-mill for the genre, because in prog this is a commonality, but it still feels like it has the threads of good songwriting and excellent musicianship and good performance all come together in order to drive a fantastic song as the last thing that is registered to your memory whenever you listen to Sons of Apollo's first album for the very first time. And that kind of remembrance is critical, considering if you cannot trace back that final track, or if it doesn't leave that satisfying of an impression, then you're going to approach the album with a little bit more caution. Either that, or you're going to just jump around as opposed to examining the whole body of work as a whole. And that's a bad thing. That doesn't show that an album has a very good continuity and has probably been met with sporadically good songwriting as opposed to completely excellent songwriting. This is a disc that I feel has a lot of strengths that sort of teases you into really loving this album, but as a whole, it at points feels a little bit weak. It does have sort of that Winery Dogs vibe at some points with just an excessive prog overload. Derek on the keys is certainly showcasing that trademark sound of his in order to build and give these tracks a little bit more depth, but it still comes off as just sort of that same songwriting process. I would love to see this band take the ideas from those 3 epics that they had and really build maybe an album of just 5 or 6 songs, or really just construct a very long suite and see what that does for them. It sounds like this band has the creativity and the ability to do that, even though these epic tracks may not flow into 7 different directions. It feels like that there is enough kinesis and enough life breathed into these compositions that would actually help them whenever it comes to writing something a little bit more complex. They have some of the basics down. They should. They're masters of their craft. But I would love to see all those basics go up to the 201 level instead of the 101 level. All in all, this album has a lot of great things that prog fans will want. Not to mention the stars that are included will make some of them gush a little bit from their pants, and we really can't help that all that much. It's kind of a natural thing. I would give this album a 20 out of 30. I think that it has some great moments, but still also suffers from a little bit of very kind of droll songwriting. I don't want to say terrible songwriting. It's just very typical. It's an album that feels at places to be very much on par with a lot of the rest of the genre and doesn't stand out very much. But whenever it does aim to stand out, this is an album that does keep your interest and keep you wanting to come back to these other songs, explore them more, and hope that you find something that drives you to really love the disc. The one thing I will say extremely positively in this band's corner is that despite all of these things, this is a very smooth listen from start to finish. It doesn't jolt you around or feel like you're getting lost from the flock. Instead, you're staying right on board. You just kind of have a lecturer that is great at some points and not so great in others. But I want to know what you guys think about Sons of Apollo's Psychotic Symphony. Let me know in the comments below. I'm coverkillernation, and Nia Obliviscaris is coming. It is coming. So definitely stay tuned for that. If you love this video and you want to see more of them made, scope out the link in the description box below. Maybe throw a tip, throw a buck or two, so they can continue to be made. I'm very thankful for everybody who has decided to do that so far. I'm very appreciative. I'll have an update about all of that later. Take care.